All right, welcome everyone to another episode of Behind the Human. I'm your host, Mark Champagne, and it's my job to unpack the stories and mental fitness practices keeping people at the top of their game personally and professionally. And we definitely have one of those stunning humans on the show today. We've got Kristen Holmes on the show, who is the Vice President of Performance Science at Whoop, where she spearheads the company's thought leadership initiatives. With a keen focus on engaging top researchers and partners, Kristen delves into the intricate realm of individual and team biometric and performance data across high-stake verticals. Her expertise extends to working closely with premier tactical, professional, and surgical teams, as well as NCAA athletes and teams worldwide, aiding them in deciphering Whoop data to optimize training, recovery, and sleep behaviors. Before her role at Whoop, Kristen established herself as a force in the athletic arena. Here are just a few of her accomplishments. 3-time All-American and 2-time Big Ten Athlete of the Year at the University of Iowa in field hockey and basketball, a 7-year member of the U.S. national field hockey team, and one of the most successful coaches in Ivy League history, having won 12 league titles in 13 seasons and a national championship at Princeton University. Kristen, how did the AI do on your bio?
It was pretty darn good,
close?
yeah.
Yeah, welcome to the show.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I can't wait. There are just so many synergies. There's so many overlapping passions, of course, and just helping people reach, their maximum potential, essentially. And you'll see with the opening question of the show. I mean, we're really aligned on I think slowing down and really understanding who we are and who we're striving to become and trying to forge a path to, get there with practices and our behaviors and our habits and obviously good data to help support that journey. So with that, I'm going to put your bio aside and everything you've accomplished aside and what you do aside and just ask you the question, who are you?
I think that's a great question. I aspire to be a person who exudes health and I want to be a great role model for my children and the people I interact with, and that means that I need to take care of myself in a way that allows me to show up for the people that I love in a way that feels aligned with who I want to be in the world. So I think, I think at my core, I really just try to do my very best to live my values. And I think about that a lot, and really, what do those values look like in action? And then I really just aspire to just align my behaviors with the things that I really care deeply about and who I want to be in the world. And so, I think at my core, it's really just living my values, and those are things like, inner peace, so just really trying to stay as present as I can so I can engage with the other humans I interact with in a way that, makes them feel safe and loved. And I think it's really hard to do that when you're not present. So I try to be as present as I can, and growth is really important to me. Going back to the question of who I want to be, I want to be a person who is growing personally and professionally, intellectually, and creating outlets in my life that enable me to grow. I want to impact. I am obviously a health education, public facing health educator, and I really want to impact health at scale, and that means doing research that's rigorous and that can hopefully help people understand what behaviors they need to do in order to I suppose live their life in a way that's truly rewarding. So those are, I guess, a few of my values and I guess who I aspire to be in the world.
Do you remember when you first intentionally really thought about who you wanted to be and how you wanted to show up in this world? Were there moments or any kind of pivotal situations that sparked, okay, you sat down and you really thought about that and really thought about the values and so forth? Because I know you live them and I know it's very present. And I don't know how many years this has been, but I'm always curious to see, how that comes about, because not everyone thinks about these things until they hit a wall of some sort, and then you're forced into that reflection, which I would love to try to prevent some of that for people on the other side, to just take a few minutes, right, to ask these bigger questions.
Yeah. Well, I think the first, I think you nailed it. There's that awareness piece, and I think sometimes that awareness, comes from hardship, where you're forced to be introspective, and you're kind of forced into a little bit of a darker place, and it's like you kind of have this crossroads in those moments where you can kind of choose a path that's adaptive, or choose a path that's maladaptive, and I think for me at an early in my life, I really found teams, a field hockey team, a soccer team, a basketball team. I kind of found a place where, I really felt like safe, to kind of be myself. And I think I adopted the values of those teams and realized inside a team, you need to have some sort of common foundation, and that starts with thinking about, all right, what do we care about? Who do we want to be? So I think at an early age, I had coaches who asked some of these questions, and then I started to just build my own framework around that. And, so as I went from team to team, I kind of like, oh, all right, those are the values of those teams. Well, what are the values of these teams? And then you start to realize, what are my actual values?
You put your
how do
formula
I
together?
Yeah. And so I think that, I think I started to become aware that there's all sorts of things out there in terms of, that direct our behavior. But if I could just be really clear on who I wanted to be in the world and what my core beliefs are, that could just bring a level of clarity to my life and help me make decisions. And I guess I just have always felt that is like the foundation. And if I can just live my values, align my behaviors with what I say I care about, then that brings consistency to a situation, to my team, to my friendships. And so I think I always wanted to just kind of, I wanted people to know what to expect from me. And I think that came from my environment, which my upbringing, is very unpredictable, really chaotic. I didn't know what was happening next. And I knew that I didn't want to create that for other people. Like I wanted to be that really consistent, reliable thing. And I knew that, making sure my values and my behaviors were aligned was like a path to that. So yeah.
Where did that emotion, do you remember where that emotion sat for you in your body? Kind of growing up in a more chaotic situation?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of fear, right? And uncertainty. And I knew that I really wanted, like I aspired, I think to know those emotions of trust. Like I was always like, I just wanted so desperately to just, feel safe, and feel, really grounded. And so I think I recognize that, okay, there's these emotions of fear, there's these emotions of trust. And, how do I control the things that I can control that allows me to tap into these emotions of trust more often than not?
Yeah.
So I could pay down or compensate, I think, for some of this unpredictability that I didn't have control over. So I think it sat in my body as fear.
Okay.
For sure. And I realized that with that fear comes this like imbalance that I could feel that tension. And so I tried to figure out, okay, what are other ways that I can bring in safety, and bring in more emotions that I know are coming from a place of trust.
Yeah. And how do you, so present day, how do you check in with yourself to just monitor? I mean, of course, there's a bunch of Whoop data on that side, but I mean, more so, from your mind that you're living those values that, because the weeks are busy. There's so much going on typically that it's so easy to slip onto an autopilot without checking in, right? And seeing, I've got like a little course, deviation here that often we miss if we don't take some time to do some reflection. So what does that look like for you?
Yeah, I think, as long as probably like a good 10, 12 years ago, I was in that familiar spot in January where I was like, I need to do a big old reboot, because I've got all sorts of things in my life that aren't going in the way that I want them to go. And I kind of had this epiphany, like, I don't want to do this ever again. I don't want to be in a situation at the end of a year where I'm like, oh my God, I have so many things that I need to tackle. And so I just started from scratch. And I remember I was listening to a podcast with Tim Ferriss, who is just so phenomenal. Like, I was really early adopter in the whole podcast thing. I was probably the only female to listen to Joe Rogan and Tim Ferriss and Ben Greenfield. I think it was all just, I don't know why. Oh my God, I just love him so much. Yeah, he's just such a original thinker in so many ways. And I don't think he gets enough credit. Tim, same, I just feel like, Tim might, I don't know. But anyway, I forget who Tim was talking to. I need to look this up because it's such a great question of how this kind of started for me. But I remember, them thinking about, or Tim talking about this idea that, just doing things incrementally, or it sounds like, of course, no kidding, right? Like that this is, you do things incrementally and you figure out just what are these kind of core behaviors that you need to do every single day that kind of position you to not have to redo this exercise every year. And that's really the kind of the project I undertook, in January and 10 years ago. And I'll say, I really haven't had to do a hard reset since then, because I was I realized that my infrastructure wasn't set up to really support my values in a way that felt good, so I kind of always had these tensions. So I figured out, okay, what do I kind of went back to the drawing, who do I want to be in this world? So really that identity piece. And then, all right, what are my core values? And my values have evolved and changed. And, I look at my values every day. So to answer your question, part of that infrastructure, where I again, things that I needed to do every day in order to kind of stay on track was really to audit how I spend my time, right? Because how you spend your time ends up being who you are, right?
Yeah.
Whether you like it or not. And it doesn't matter, that is when you actually look at how you spend your time, what you put in your mouth, the things you drink, who you talk to, right? You become that.
Yeah.
Before you even realize it, honestly. And I did not want to be a pawn in anyone's game. I was like, you know what? I'm going to get so damn intentional and have a point of view about my own life. And I realized that the clearer I got over the course of these last 10 years, the anxiety that comes from seeking approval just goes away. And you're just left with this point of view about your own life. It's the most empowering thing ever. Right. So I just really, I got super clear on my identity and I kind of have this framework, identity, values, anchors, outlets.
Okay.
And I literally year after, every quarter, I kind of revisit my identity, my values, my anchors, and my outlets. And I just make sure that I'm in a position where I can live my values 80% of the time. And that's where it comes auditing your how you actually live, your behaviors, on a really detailed, it's painful. When you write it down, you're like, holy cow, there's a lot of things that I do, a lot of people I interact with, a lot of things that I think about that are not serving me. Yeah. And when you go through this calculus, you kind of start to realize what what isn't serving you and what is serving you. And really, I think in the end, when you start to dial that in, you're in a position to have a lot of capacity, you have a lot more free time. And also, I think what the happy kind of I think, ending to a lot of this is that I literally never feel like I have to take a vacation. Like I'm never in a situation where I need to vacate my life, like to recharge. Like I wake up like pretty darn energized every day and excited to tackle the things in my life. And so I think that this has really worked for me. You know, and how what that looks like on a micro level is, you know, I meditate on my values every day.
Okay.
Like I go through, I'm like, what does inner peace actually mean? Like, am I actually being present? And I'll, you know, I do a lot of reading and, you know, I literally just will search up inner peace and, you know, see what kind of comes up. And
I like that.
You know, it's just, and it's, so
fresh.
you'll get, you know, writings from, you know, or an essay from John Gardner or something from Emerson or from David White, or, you know, all these people who are writing prolifically about these things. And, you know, I just take a small little passage and, you know, I sit in the natural light and I read this passage and I think about how it might apply to me. And that sounds, people are like, oh, you really do that? Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
Like every day. And the people who know me will attest to that. But I think that is like, that is just one of the, I think, paths to like this alignment, you know, and to reducing that internal tension and being able to choose trust over fear. And, you know, these are just things that I've taken decades to kind of synthesize and internalize, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, what I really love about it, because I'm seeing a visual, and it's something I want to do more of on my side as well, is I can almost see like you take your values and then surround yourself with content related to those values. Of course, like you said, you're looking it up, but I can see it also, you know, maybe this month you have a book on, you know, inner peace by someone, or you curate some podcast lists and whatnot on those values. And it's obviously just a beautiful way to expand your own mind and the way and your perspective on those important factors in your life, those values. But then it's like the counter defense against all of the other garbage that is getting thrown at us.
The noise.
Constantly.
It cuts it out. Yeah.
Right? Exactly. Yeah. And then now you're fueling your mind with good, healthy mental nutrition, just like what you alluded to with our bodies. Right? And it's just a beautiful loop that naturally will help, you know, continue to sharpen those self-awareness, you know, skills and whatnot. I love it.
Yeah.
Love it.
I think starting the day with something like that makes you feel like kind of in control is really important, you know?
Yeah. It doesn't take that long. That's the other thing.
No.
Like, you're not talking about 3 hours of reading to start the day here.
No, I'm sometimes it's just 5 minutes, you know, I'm busy. Like I got a couple kids, like I got a lot of responsibilities, just like everyone, you know? And, but it's like, I guess when I go back to this concept of, you know, not needing the January reboot, like not needing to vacate my life, like, you know, every 6 weeks, like, you know, it's about building in these small practices that like really help you orient your behaviors consistently and reinforce who you say you want to be in the world, you know, and that's how you choose your behaviors, right? It's based on, am I practicing every day who I want to be in this world?
Powerful question.
And if you're not, you know, what are we doing here? You know, and I guarantee that manifests in, you know, it basically creates a lot of stress in the system, and we know what happens with that, right? Like when we accumulate a lot of unmanaged stress, that it manifests as disease and interrupts our sleep, and you know, our hormones aren't as balanced. Like there's just this downstream effect, right?
Yeah, but it starts. I love it. You just provided the perfect segue, because I definitely wanted to get into these topics around health specifically. But I'm happy it just naturally started with actually the natural starting point of really, you know, some of those fundamental questions on understanding who we are and who we want to be, and providing that internal framework, you know, to help us, which then gets into a lot of the other topics that I just, like I said before we hit record, I was just writing. I have a section where I've labeled it concepts and terminology. There's just so many things I want to ask you about health, but the question that feels most intuitive to ask you, because I'm in it right now with my wife. We have 2 young boys, 2 and 7, and the 7-year-old is like making his mission to bring home every illness and disease from his school possible. And just, as you know, just cycling, and there's a lot of parents that I think go through this. It's so frustrating on this side because we really try hard on many factors with our health and still get hit, more than what we'd like to. And I think you said that you mentioned this on Steven's podcast where he said you have not been sick since 2017. So that's my question. What is going on?
I know.
How old are your kids?
So my son is 7. He just turned 17, and my daughter is 15. And they're in high school. There's like a virus going around literally every week. Like a couple folks in my household got my partner and my son both got COVID. So
resilient mom over here. I love it.
I know. No, it's so interesting because it's funny because that got out there and people are like, that's not true, or they think I live in a bubble. But when I travel all over the world, like I'm a student, I have a full-time job, I have 2 kids. Like, I'm not, I don't live in a bubble, right? But I think there's a lot of things, but I think number one, I think it's this values and behavior alignment is the place to start. That's so foundational. I think impacts your immune system on a profound level. When we are not living our purpose, we're going to have dissonance, right? And that puts stress on the body. It impacts our sleep, right? And so I think number one, again, just getting really clear on purpose and just making sure that your habits are such where you can practice living that purpose, and you have, and I call those kind of the anchors, your anchor behaviors. Like, what are the core things that I need to try to do as often as possible across the month? One is stabilizing my sleep-wake time, which could be really hard with a 2-year-old, but then it's like, if I can't stabilize my sleep-wake time as consistently as possible, what's that second most important behavior? And I would say, trying to really keep your feeding windows as consolidated as possible, your eating windows as consolidated as possible. People don't realize the amount of stress you put on your system when you're eating outside of the natural light dark cycle. We're not really meant to, digest food during those times. We're meant to be fasting during those times after the sun goes down. So I think, again, just, that alignment with the natural light dark cycle is a huge piece for me, I think, in terms of staying healthy. Well,
I have to say that was one of the most eye-opening pieces of data that came up on my side was the eating window. Like we eat pretty early just with young children.
The kids,
but every now and then, something, and I don't really snack at night, but I think there was a couple times where I might have had something at 7 p.m. or something, which was abnormal. So it was, I knew that was the change, right? And we just woke up and holy smokes, like look at the recovery and the effects that one thing has. And to the point where I remember this was last week actually, I was flying home from Montreal after spending some time with the team, and I was kind of hungry and it was a late flight. And I was like, no, I'm not doing it. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. I know what's going to happen. I'm already on an airplane and traveling kind of outside of a regular situation. There's a lot of light I don't have my blue blockers on. So it's just that level of data is so impactful that I just, and for everyone listening, Whoop did not reach out to us over here at Behind the Human. I reached out to the company because I've heard Kristen speak, and I'm a huge, huge, huge fan of Whoop as a tool in living life and just performing at the best we can and feeling at our best. So I just want to put that caveat out there as we continue to talk about Whoop.
Yeah, it is. I think the data are really empowering. And I think to your point, like it's kind of like just this self-experimentation, and we're all really unique. How, food late for you is going to impact, it might be different than how it impacts me. Some people are just more resilient or more, not as impacted by some of this circadian stuff as other people. That's just the reality. But, I'll say with the food, I think sometimes people are like, oh my God, I can't have anything to eat. But gosh, if you're hungry, in an hour before bed, like have some casein, something high in casein protein. I think that the idea is we just don't want to create a lot of spikes in our blood sugar in the lead up to bed. So you don't want to, pound a half a bag of gummy bears, for example. That's going to have a negative impact and divert resources, and probably create a crash. You get hypoglycemic at some point in the night, which will wake you up, right? So so it's just being smart about what you're putting in your body. But and there have been studies that show like kind of full fat yogurt, like kind of this, stuff that's food that's higher in casein protein, for example, doesn't have a meaningful impact on markers of sleep and recovery. So, so I think for folks who are really hungry before they go to bed, like that full fat yogurt is a great alternative and shouldn't impact sleep too much.
Sure.
But yeah.
It has been eye-opening though. I think what's shifted in my mind, or what's been really insightful, is just kind of looking at the body and definitely sleep from an energy perspective. I don't know, for whatever reason, I didn't connect that. And just now the perspective is always, how much energy is my body going to require to do X, digest food, or I was sick a couple weeks ago and felt the fever at night, and it was unbelievable to just see like the stress level while I was sleeping. I was sleeping. I do remember kind of getting some kind of, a little bit of the shakes, and then I woke up and was okay. But it was all the alarm bells were ringing on the Whoop, obviously, my Whoop data. But it's just that perspective of looking at things from an energy standpoint has been really, really fascinating.
Yeah, I think energy management is kind of is a thing, and being understanding, how to, like, certain behaviors are metabolically costly, right? And and certain patterns of thinking or certain kind of statuses psychologically, like being really fearful or having a lot of uncertainty, those are very costly to the system.
Yeah.
So it's kind of looking at, like, in terms of, all right, exercise is a cost, but that actually is going to put money back in the bank. Like, you're going to get return on that investment.
Yeah.
Alcohol, you're never going to get a return on that investment.
Yeah, that
so
one's
kind
so
of
obvious.
Understanding that one's really obvious.
Yeah.
Chronic short sleep, you're never going to get that back, right? Even if you try to extend your sleep, that will help you recover and restore. But there's going to be this, little ding in your baseline that it's going to be hard to recuperate. So you just want to think about, like, your body as, like, it's like, how do I navigate my choices across the day that make sure that I'm not in a situation where I deplete my bank account, right? If we're using this kind of bank account analogy. So you want to kind of keep depositing, with your behaviors, depositing money into the bank. So when things go, when you're traveling, or when you have, this period of time where maybe you have to care for a sick child, like, you have some buffer, you have some, savings that you can kind of dip into, that allow you to move. Yeah. Like, I just feel like it's like, when you think about it, and I just spoke to Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett yesterday. Okay. So she's, How Emotions Are Made. But she talks about this body budget, and I'm like, oh, I love that analogy. It's just, it makes a lot of sense. But I think we need to kind of not stress over our behaviors, but just be aware of things that are going to contribute positively to energy, right? If we're thinking about, how do I wake up and be able to operate in the world with a level of alertness that allows me to engage with the world in the way that I want to, right? And then the other side of it is, you want to also be in a position where your body is sleepy when it needs to be sleepy, right? I think there's nothing more frustrating when I can't get focused and, like, the right amount of arousal for a situation, or I can't, like, generate the calmness and the sleepiness when I need to maybe, like, fall asleep. Like if I can't be alert when I need to be alert and sleepy when I need to be sleepy, at a fundamental level, that causes a lot of stress, right? Yeah. So I think proactively understanding how to manage our energy so we can kind of be in these achieve these desired states is kind of at a foundation level, like what we're trying to do here.
Yeah. Well, and it's just I always find it fascinating because, like I said, I work with a lot of businesses and teams, and in those worlds, I mean, brands and same thing at Whoop, obviously, and for myself as well, we look at data all the time, to see where's the brand at, where's the company at, where do we want to go next, and okay, well, what do we need to do to get there, and we make decisions based on data, but we often don't do that for ourselves, like the biggest business and game of them all, essentially, right? So I find that's where. Because my wife said this to me a few weeks ago, and it was interesting. It made me think because I was, I've been telling her what I've been noticing with the data and whatnot, and alcohol, like the usual suspects. And she's like, "Well, that though, why? Like, why do you need Whoop or any device, frankly, to tell you that?" And my response was, well, first of all, there's more nuances there, and I can't compete against the beautiful algorithms that you have and putting them all together. But even that aside, as someone that started a journaling app about 5 years ago, it's the journaling, it's the constant, it's the reminder of I did have a drink, and that's what it did, and I've just reminded myself of that today. I probably won't do that again. And it's that repetition that I find especially with the journaling. Flow in Whoop that is so critical. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's again, it kind of goes back to like practicing who you want to be in the world, right? Like, and that's what it's like. If I want to, if I say that I want to be present, well, if I'm seeing in my data that wow, I'm not actually adapting in a functional way to stress, I'm probably not doing one of these things in the way that I need to be doing, like that ladder up to enabling me to be the person I want to be in this world. So it agreed. Like you can't, I think what is very clear is we can't separate out the psychology and the physiology.
No.
They are absolutely intertwined on the deepest level, right? So I think when we are not living our purpose, we don't have a sense of efficacy, that is the skills and resources to do the things in my life that I want to do. And I don't have a feeling of control. So purpose, efficacy, and control are three of the most core psychological needs, right? When that isn't firing for us, it will manifest in our sleep. It will manifest in markers of recovery, like a heart rate variability and resting heart rate and respiratory rate. And so I think goes back to the original question you asked, just about awareness, right? These data just bring us more at home in ourselves, like more in touch with what's happening at home in ourselves, and give us, most importantly, help us understand where to apply our effort, right? If I see that I'm not adapting in a functional way, and I can see that in my markers of sleep and recovery, I need to go back to that. What am I practicing? How am I living? Right? Like, what are the things that I'm doing every single day? Are they contributing to who I want to be in the world or not? And it's having that like constant check-in with yourself, honestly. And data is just the truth teller that basically tells you if you're living your values. In my view, that's what I use it for.
I love it. If we put technology aside, just because I want to make sure we provide something for everyone, obviously people can tell I'm a big fan of Whoop. And I will add, I've been a long time Apple Watch guy. I haven't worn that since I've had Whoop because it's so different. And I can say this because it's not like this is a sponsored episode. It's way better. It's just way better. And I love that there's no screen on my wrist. That's the other big thing. Yeah. Which I've heard Will talk about, saying that there's a lot of requests for that. And it sounds like you're all staying true to staying screen free, which is so important.
Apple absolutely has its benefits. There's so much functionality. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, the fact that doesn't have a screen, I think is really like such an important value proposition, right? Like we're not, you can't send text messages, you can't call people. Like it's literally just, it's on your wrist. It's passively collecting data, really important data at a super high fidelity, right? Much more so than Apple, right? Because we're not doing all these, we're not
other
using
things.
Our computational energy for all these other things, right? Yeah. So as a result, we're able to really, I think, deliver insights that are grounded in really good data.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So sorry, I'm the one that took us on a tangent on that
No,
one.
that's all right.
But the question I wanted to ask is if you put it technology aside, you do any technology, and you had to go analog style, what would you be tracking? Like, how would you check in to best evaluate kind of your sleep and how you're functioning as a human?
Yeah, I mean, menstrual cycle is massive, right? Like that's such a great signal. So I track the regularity of my cycle. The more regular it is, generally, the more we go back to kind of probably the better I'm managing my energy, the more balance I have. And so that cycle regularity is number one. So if I don't have any technology at all, that'd be the first thing. Do I have the ability to be alert when I want to be alert?
Yeah, I like that.
That is huge, right? Like, and just like literally like thinking about your day, like, do I have the energy when, I want to work out? Like, do I have the energy to present at 3:00 in the afternoon? When do I actually start to fade and dip? Is that normal? Is it not? Do I need caffeine to kind of keep me going past 12, right? Or whatever it is that, and then do I fall asleep when I want to fall asleep? How long does it take me to fall asleep roughly? Those are, I think, huge. Do I, am I moody? Am I irritable? Do I struggle kind of accepting reality on its own terms? Like, so these are things that I would definitely be evaluating. And then I think, finally, I would just look at my calendar and like, all right, how many things across the day really align with my values? And just look at very micro and tactical, across the week. And again, I think for me, like I need to have like at least, 85% alignment, or I start to feel pretty twitchy.
Yeah.
and that dissonance is I like sit in that, I'd be like, oh, okay, what do I need to actually change about my life to create more alignment? So I think to your original, so one of your points you made early in the conversation, like I think people don't necessarily, they end up kind of accumulating habits, right? Without like unconsciously.
Yeah.
And then all of a
you
sudden,
adjust your normal.
Yeah. And then you kind of become this person. You're like, how did I even get to this spot? Right?
Yeah.
Whether it's, you're 15 pounds overweight or you're, it's like, how did I even get there? And I think that to me is what I would want to avoid, not the weight specifically, but just this idea that I'm becoming this person that I don't even recognize, right? Like that, to me, that is how we need to audit our time and be strategic about how we spend our time so we can be the version of ourselves that we feel really proud of. So those are some of the things that
these are amazing.
Look at.
I wrote every one of those questions down. I have a weekly review that I usually do not usually, it's pretty religious, every Friday around 3 p.m. And I just have 3 fundamental questions. What went well this week? What I've changed this week, and I always end on gratitude with what can I celebrate this week, and then do a scan to do it. Yeah. But I want to add a couple of questions because even that, like that takes 10 minutes, and it's I feel like I've become I'm getting a PhD in my weeks every single week because you get so much information. Yeah. But taking it a step further and looking at, okay, I'll do it with this. It's like this podcast, if I look back at it, did I have the energy that I needed to show up for you, right? And if I hope you can feel it, I would say yes to that.
100%.
But I mean, it's just a good way to add another element there to check in with yourself and see, okay, like, are there some flags? And it doesn't take that much time, but it's just so insightful. Love it.
Yeah, we just don't want to like go too long where we're ignoring those flags, because that's when all of a sudden, like you're in a mental health crisis, or, you're not like coping, as effectively. And then your energy levels decrease to a point where you're not able to move as much as you want to move, or, So I think it can go wrong pretty quickly if we're not checking in with ourselves. But I think more importantly, it's like each individual has to figure out like, what are the questions that you need to ask yourself, right? Because those questions might be different than what I feel like I need to ask myself, right? Yeah. But I do think for women, menstrual cycle regularity, if you're naturally cycling, right? If you're not on hormonal birth control, that is a really powerful insight, because our cycles are so tied to how we're adapting to stress. And our body is incredibly resilient that, you'll still have your period, but it will likely be off, and I think that is just such a great clue that, maybe I'm undereating, maybe I'm overeating, maybe I'm over-exercising, under-exercising, not managing my relationships as proactively, and that's manifesting in stress. And so I feel like the menstrual cycle is just such a great signal.
Yeah. Amazing. Okay. Can we talk about a few concepts that I've heard you bring up that I think are so important for people to know about, and just take some time thinking about these things? You touched on it, and I think it's linked to your 7 years of no illness or very little illness, is just the social jet lag concept. That was a big one for me. Doing the research for this interview, I was probably like the vast majority of the world, like super focused on the 8 hours, which I still am, of course. But
you need sufficient sleep, but there's another piece to that.
I am seeing the consistent, like especially in the wake time consistency, and really trying to, especially on weekends.
I know.
Because we, as parents, we take turns. Like, it's like Saturday, I'll sleep in a little bit later, and on Sunday, my wife will do that. And I'm like, well, maybe I'm not going to do that, actually.
Yeah, we're really trying to dial this. And I think if you can so oftentimes when we wake up at really inconsistent times, that throws off our circadian rhythms, right? And that has a downstream effect to, every cell, tissue, organ in the body is going to kind of feel any misalignment that we have. So I will say, as it relates specifically to wake time, yes, if you want to just try to wake up at the same time as often as possible, get outside, view sunlight, that's going to allow you to fall asleep when you need to fall asleep in that regular, and have a regular sleep time, later, when it's time for bed. I would say that if you are dealing with insufficient sleep, most likely your body is going to want to wake up when it wants to wake up, right? So give into that, wake up, and then take a nap. Try not to have caffeine, and then take a nap around 11, 12 o'clock. So maybe before or after lunch, to try to just... I hate saying make up for sleep, because you can never fully make up for lost biological sleep, but that will absolutely help you feel more energized, will increase your cognitive functioning, for later in that afternoon, will make you feel, less irritable. So I think that, to me, is kind of the strategy, is to just build in these naps if you can. And that could be the trade-off with your wife, is, it's like you figure out when you can just kind of have this really nice, 45-minute block where you just, boom, you shut it down.
And is there a time, like, is there any research around how late in the day a nap, I guess, can then be detrimental to falling asleep after, or is there? Yeah.
The closer you get to your intended sleep time with your nap is really how you need to think about it. So if you're typically falling asleep somewhere between 9 and 11 o'clock, like, you probably don't want to nap after 1 or 2. I would say you want your nap to end by 1 o'clock or 2 p.m. And then obviously not have any caffeine after. Probably it just depends. Some people metabolize caffeine really quickly. Others are slow metabolizers. But generally speaking, you don't want caffeine after 12. Just to ensure that it doesn't impact your sleep in any way. But yeah, I would say by 1 or 2, you want to be done sleeping and allow that natural sleep pressure to build. Okay.
And I've heard you talk about some pretty, just because it's a different audience, obviously, but there's some pretty serious ramifications when it comes to, like, really short. I can't remember the exact data you mentioned, but like 45-minute differences in, I think this was a CEO study that you did around, cognitive, like, function or decision-making and so forth. Yeah. Like, it's not huge windows of time. So it's doable to work with this.
I think so. Yeah. So there's a couple things I think so just back on the social jet lag. So just to put some data around that. So if there's a study done, it was in college aged students, and and these students who were, had past history of mental illness. Okay. So either suffered from depression. So these are kind of vulnerable population. And basically what they saw is with every hour of weekend to weekday variability in sleep wake, there was a 17% increase in non-suicidal ideation.
Whoa. Wow.
So when we're already vulnerable, that sleep wake variability can really move around our mental and physical health.
Yeah.
So I would say that, we want to try to minimize that variability and as much as possible. And it really, our interaction with light is, our light behavior is so important. So just to double down, we want to get outside within, 30 minutes of waking up. We want to see the natural light. We want to get that into our eyeballs. So every cell, tissue, organ, and body knows exactly what to do. And then as the sun is setting, if we can, we want to try to get outside, view that sun, as it's setting on the horizon. And these are great moments for, awe and gratitude, stack some of these other practices. But that, again, sends a really important signal to the rest of our body as to what needs to be happening. And then once you get back inside, you have your dinner, really try to reduce the amount of light that's going directly into the retina. So you end up producing melatonin at the strength that you should be producing it, so you can fall asleep when you want to fall asleep. So, so that's really important, and those are some components of how to minimize sleep wake variability is getting a handle on the light, and then I would say in terms of sleep debt, that's basically not meeting your sleep need. So when you have consistently short sleep, you end up accruing this sleep debt. So what we saw in our data is that for every 45 minutes of sleep debt, we saw a 5 to 10% decrease in next day executive function. So your mental control, was compromised next day. It's significant. And, for some folks it's more. So this is just the mean, right? So for some folks it's maybe a little less, but some folks it's actually more. And, and the more sleep that you have, the worse it gets, right? It's not linear, but I think it's enough to be like, okay, this is a variable that I want to try to control as much as possible, because I know it's going to impact my ability to make decisions tomorrow, and it's going to impact, and also we saw that it impacts psychological safety. So this is kind of the part
I was surprised with.
That is just, to me, it's mind blowing, to me, it's important, because I think sometimes we're like, well, it's my sleep, whatever, like people get all like hard about it, but you know what? No, actually, your sleep deprivation impacts me. Mm-hmm. It impacts, the gal at the CVS counter. It impacts, your employee. It impacts your children. Like, sleep debt does not just impact you. Yeah. And people all over the world have to recognize that this is something that to the extent that you can control it. And I know that I'm talking about healthy adult sleepers, and there's going to be constraints at different points of your life. You're going to have young children. You're going to be caretaking, for a parent. And I'm not talking about those situations. I'm talking that people who have resources and who have control for the most part. Yeah. It is worth your effort to get control of your sleep debt. Yeah. And that study specifically showed it was looking at the sleep of of kind of the CEO. I think in this case, so the person at the top, sure. and then looked at how psychologically safe their direct reports felt. And what we saw is that there was a relationship between the psychological safety of the direct reports and how much sleep debt the leader of those direct reports had.
So I would have never guessed that.
It's crazy. I mean, it's the first time we've ever been able to link psychological safety to kind of something physiological like that. So Yeah, I mean, you think about military leaders, you think about, the list goes on of anyone
Yeah.
leading people, right? If you're in a situation where you're carrying around sleep debt, the people around you are going to feel less confident to be themselves. They're going to feel less
Mm.
confident in kind of showing up as the truest version of themselves, which we know when you show up as the truest version of yourself, generally speaking, good things are going to happen,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
you're operating from a place of truth and honesty, and you feel like your ideas are worthwhile and can be accepted. And so, and we know that this translates, to the bottom line of businesses as well.
Yeah.
Which is also really fascinating.
Mhm.
There's a
Well,
revenue component to a lack of psychological safety that's quite compelling.
Well, this is one, not one. I mean, everything you mentioned essentially in these studies, I'm going to add to my arsenal because I've depending on who I'm speaking with, and to say this in a nice, polite Canadian way, of course, but I'll always just say, well, as soon as, if our minds are operating at 50%, or if they stop operating, so does your brand in business. I mean, we don't have to get any more complicated than that. But by the way, I kind of want to just say, by the way, slip these studies in front of them as well. Look what's happening here, right? And when you pause the rat race of a lot of the lives that are running out there and everything going on, and just ask, does this make sense? I think it's a pretty large or pretty loud, resounding yes, right? That, along with everything that you've been mentioning around, just as soon as we start going against nature, usually there's ramifications to that, and we see that with light, of course, and everything, right? So yeah. Amazing. Okay, I want to respect your time. We're running a little bit over here. I've got one more question for you. I told you we could talk for hours, so we'll have to do a part two at one point.
For sure.
I would just love, I think I may know how you'll answer this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. All said and done, when the work's done and all of that, what do you want your two kids to really remember you as? What are those values or those moments that you hope that they both would say, mom was this?
It's more of how I want them to feel when they're around me. I want them to feel safe and I want them to feel loved.
Yeah. I feel that in my heart. I hope everyone on the other side. I mean, I've got a little teary-eyed going with that.
I know. It makes me teary-eyed too when I say it, because
But there's human connection.
It's that's who I want to be who I want to be I want to create conditions that allow them to feel, safe to be the truest version of themselves. I think a lot about psychological safety in my own home and how I show up for them and how I listen to them and look at them. And, I try to get, actually really granular with that and hold myself to a very high standard. And I think love is, so connected to safety, but when I go back to those emotions of the lens, just those trust-based emotions and fear-based emotions, it's just things that I've been thinking about my whole life, and it's just I want them to be able to feel growth in the future is possible, and that they feel optimistic and they have a sense of grace and graciousness, and and they can access those emotions, right? Because they trust the world, they trust that it's consistent and kind of and with good intentions and for most part safe, and so I want to reduce I guess some of that friction.
I have to, of course, thank you for your time to come on the show, but a higher thank you for just showing up for yourself every day and staying true to your own values. And I know you grew up in a really challenging environment. You had to find those elements and those values for yourself in other ways to, as you mentioned, kind of counterbalance. And I want to thank you for doing that or putting that work in, because the ripple effect of that is affecting, not just the people we're speaking to on this show, but your work with Whoop and all of the work you've done with athletes, and the message and your passion is just rippling around the world in a way that we can't even measure, but know is so profound. So thank you for showing up each day like this.
Well, it means so much. Thank you.